Melina Miles, entomologist with Queensland Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, based in Toowoomba, with a particular interest in developing management strategies for insect pests of broadacre crops in the northern region. In the last 12 months we've had a particular focus on the management of aphids in canola. My observations were that there's a lot of spraying of aphids goes on in the northern region towards the end of flowering and sort of early to mid podding, and I was I guess had some concerns that really in most instances what they were protecting in terms of flowers and early pods were not going to result in effective pods later in the season. So really they were spending money to control those aphids just because they looked bad and not because they really were impacting on yield. And we've done a number of trials over the last 2 seasons, and in fact that suspicion has been supported by the data where we have shown quite clearly that sort of from about 20 days onwards, post first flower, aphid infestations at that stage and the impairment of podding of those late flowers doesn't result in any impact on yield whatsoever. And we haven't examined the data fully from the latest trials, but we suspect that it's probably compensation in terms of additional laterals for early aphid infestations, or compensation of pods that have already set for those that aren't setting later. We had a little bit of a look at aphids in faba beans this year. There's quite a big outbreak in faba beans in the northern region, and with a particular view to what the virus impacts were, and in conjunction with the pathologists, despite very widespread aphid infestations and quite high densities and some direct damage in some instances, there was actually very little virus transmission to those crops. So that was a story from this year. In the event of similar outbreaks, we may see a different outcome. But I think with faba beans, it does suggest that in areas where you may have had those aphid outbreaks and you may be susceptible, that a seed dressing that might protect those plants early may be a reasonable way to approach aphids and virus transmission at this point. We don't have the tools to enable us to predict when there will be outbreaks of these aphids. It looks like the cowpea aphid this year migrated some distance into the cropping areas, and so predicting those outbreaks is extremely difficult. And we also don't have any tools that would help us to understand what the virus load is in the local areas that might help us predict what the transmission rates would be.